Good afternoon, class. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I've got notes for psychology, module 15, adolescence. So here we go. As we go along, make sure that you have your handout to put down the notes. When we talk about the whole notion of adolescence, this is something that is not necessarily very old in history. Dating back to the 1800s, there was this little transition time between adulthood and childhood. But for the most part, young people basically kind of became adults about the age of 14 or 15. By the time that they were 20, most of them had already started a family. So, adolescence really is a new term. It is the transition between childhood and adulthood, basically from puberty to independence. And during adolescence, we have sexual maturation. This is happening about 2 years earlier now than it did 100 years ago. It also, for the most part, is actually being extended a little longer today because of the fact that most people go to college and so your formal education goes on a little bit. So adolescence actually might kind of go into your 20s. And the fact that most young people are waiting a long time to marry. When we talk about the physical developments, puberty, this is that period of sexual maturation. Depending upon your gender, girls roughly age 11, boys roughly age 13. There are primary and secondary sexual characteristics that are kind of noted as being kind of those telltale signs of puberty. When we talk about primary sexual characteristics, that's the development of the ovaries, the testes, and such. And when we talk about the secondary characteristics, these are the non-reproductive sexual characteristics. So, like in women, that would be the changing of the breast and the hips. For men, it could be for the development of facial hair and the changing in voice. All right, as far as sexual orientation, as far as your psychology book defines it, this is the enduring sexual attraction towards people of the other gender when we talk about heterosexuality, and when we talk about the attraction towards the same gender, homosexuality. A number of studies suggest that only 3 to 4% of men and 1 to 2% of women are exclusively homosexual, and roughly 1% of the population is bisexual. Studies have not been able to establish that homosexuality is related to a parenting style. But what is probably becoming more the issue is the fact that there may be a biological issue happening. And some research suggests that it is actually the size of the hypothalamus that might give away a telltale sign of whether or not a person has a heterosexual or a homosexual attraction. Moving on, cognitive development. We talked about Jean Piaget a while back. One of the stages, the formal operation stage, typically takes place during adolescence or roughly age 12 and onward. And during this period of time, we have the development of abstract thought. And some people say that that is kind of the marking sign cognitively between childhood and adolescence. When we talk about reasoning, during this period of time. Again, formal operations kind of deal with abstract and thought. By the time of adolescent, reaches that age, they have that ability to do abstract thinking. According to David Elkins in 1978, this is also the age when one tends to focus on their self, often imagining one's own feelings are particularly unique. This focus on the self makes an adolescent at times prone to impulsive behavior and risk taking. A lot of research has been done as far as the brains of adolescents, and we find that the frontal lobe, for the most part, that is involved in organization and long-term planning and impulse control, is not fully mature until a person reaches their 20s. Morality. This is also something that is kind of being tuned in adolescence. A researcher named Lawrence Kohlberg, back in the early 1960s, developed 3 stages of moral development. They're pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. Anytime that we talk about pre-conventional thought, a person makes their moral decision based on whether or not they're going to be punished or gain a reward. Most children under the age of 9 use this type of reasoning. Some adults still use this type of reasoning. In the second stage, conventional reasoning, this is when an individual is more concerned about fitting in. And so their reasoning is kind of adapted to that. They want to play the role of the good citizen. They have a strong desire to follow the rules of society. Conventional moral reasoning is typical of most adults. And then the final stage, post conventional moral reasoning, is kind of the broader ethical principles. Um, Most people do not reach this third level, according to Kohlberg. Post-conventional moral reasoning is characterized by the reference to universal ethical principles that are represented or the obligations of all people. So, for example, you may have a sick grandmother and you have no way of getting her to the hospital. Would it be moral to steal a car to get Granny to the hospital? And that is something that might be part of that post conventional moral reasoning. There's not necessarily a finite good, but sometimes you can take something that is not so good and turn it into a good. All right, moving onward. Social development. A psychologist named Erik Erikson developed 8 stages of social development. We didn't really talk about Erikson's theories as far as how it appeals to young childhood or early childhood. But according to Erikson, all of us face these challenges. We have a task to accomplish, and if we don't accomplish that task, we are kind of stuck in this challenge. And so your chart here talks a little bit about in infancy you have a trust versus mistrust. In early childhood, autonomy, which is like that control over yourself, making decisions for yourself, versus being kind of shameful or doubting your abilities. When you get to about preschool, possibly kindergarten, initiative versus guilt, this idea that if you're not able to do some things for yourself, that you're going to be made to feel guilty. School age, industry versus inferiority. Can you handle certain tasks, or are you made to feel that you are weak because you can't? And then in adolescence and into adulthood, we get into some interesting ones that deal with relationships. So identity versus role confusion. This idea, are you trying to find yourself? Are you trying kind of unique things to stand out from the group? Or are you confused about what your role is? Or when we get into young adulthood, intimacy versus isolation. Do you have the ability to accept yourself in such a way that you can accept someone else and move on into a relationship? Or will you be kind of alone for the rest of your life? All right. So, identifying identity. Um, Identity, for the most part, this is one sense of self, according to Erikson. The adolescent task is to solidify that sense of self by testing and integrating various roles. So, in other words, you could have an adolescent who changes their hairstyle or changes their look by the style of dress, trying to figure out what they really are. Okay, according to Erikson, the adolescent task is to solidify that sense of self by testing and integrating new roles. Um, the search for identity during adolescence has several different characteristics. There's experimentation, this idea that you can help, kind of in a healthy way, try different things out. So that might mean going out for different activities at school, maybe trying out for maybe the school play, or maybe going out for um, maybe a certain uh, group to find out whether or not you enjoy that. There's a little bit of rebellion. This idea, can you establish kind of your independence from your parents? Sometimes you're not always going to see eye to eye. Most children do maintain the same core values as their mom and dads, but sometimes teens will test the limits and adopt some kind of style of fashion or grooming that adults may not understand or find acceptable. Hence, tattooing and piercing. Some parents never quite understand why. going on. We could also talk about selfishness. When we talk about relationships during adolescence, uh, there tends to be this self-ish kind of mentality. Some teenagers increasingly learn about their unique self by moving in and out of different friendships and cliques and romances. So it's not really all that remote to think that an individual who likes to kind of date and break up numerous times during high school is all that out of the ordinary. Teen friendships are genuine and important, but they also tend to be somewhat temporary because when we move on to college, sometimes we lose track of some of those friendships. Some people do maintain lifelong friendships in high school, but most adults find that these friendships become fond memories later on in life. Optimism and energy, most teenagers are armed with a lot of new and more powerful cognitive skills when they hit this age. They have kind of a fresh view of the world. Many adolescents are willing to tackle serious issues relating to human rights and environment, political campaigns, and other causes than maybe some of the adults that are around them. All right, moving on. Intimacy, which is a huge hurdle for a lot of adolescents. According to Erickson, intimacy is his ability to form close, loving, open relationships, which is a primary task in early adulthood. Many people have their most intense, intimate relationships with their spouses, but not all marriages achieve this type of closeness. Intimacy is not necessarily sexual by nature. Um, Sometimes it does occur outside of marriage with very close and trusted friends and family members. And some adolescents sometimes have a challenge with intimacy. They try to make these friendships, but sometimes that doesn't work, and we end up kind of with this conflict called isolation. Isolation happens when this individual cannot share themselves honestly and openly, and maybe are still confused a little bit about their sense of self. And hence, until they figure out who they are, they will have a hard time being intimate with someone else. All right, nearing the end here. Independence from the family. This is a huge one during adolescence. Children move from their primary attachment of their parents to basically the primary attachment of their peers. You can observe this in any group of young people. As children become adolescents, arguments with parents tend to become more frequent and intense, but most of the time, parents and teenagers get along quite well. And researchers say about 97% of American teenagers report that they get along fairly or very well with their parents. All right, I hope you got everything written down.